clearly the Academy is a place that Lynchburg's proud of and is investing in. So I couldn't be happier to be here. The music process for me has built my sense of how important art is and what it can do to a person's, for a person's life. If you're gonna do it, it has to be exceptional. The experience has to be really, really, really good. I am naturally a pretty aggressive negotiator, which I think will benefit Lynchburg probably. The nonprofit sector where we sit around and sing Kumbaya and,
That's not how it goes?
Yeah, no. My primary motive is to be kind. My second motive is to listen. And my third is to be useful and be in service of what we can do to make this community great. And if the work matters, which it does, it deserves to be done really, really well and professionally. And we need to figure out how to do that every day.
Welcome to another edition of No Holds Barred. I'm Rich Roth, and my guest today, the brand new Executive Director of the Academy, Cyrus Pace. Hi, Cyrus.
Hello.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited to be here, excited to be in Lynchburg, excited to be at the Academy.
You're just up and running and kind of getting your feet wet, and
Yep.
I appreciate you coming on board because, as we've kind of talked about a little bit, the Academy holds a very special place in a lot of people's hearts here, and Jeffrey Kirshner, did a wonderful job. I mean, the building, brought it all into fruition, and now you're being tasked with taking it, the next few steps. And it's a big job, I'm sure, and a big honor, I'm sure, as well, because it really does hold a special place in the heart of this community.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to be here because I think people should get to know me. That's part of it, taking on a level of responsibility like that. And then, as you said, what I've inherited from Jeff is an incredibly strong organization. I was, coming up with a way to describe it. It's like after someone has a standing ovation and then you have to go out on stage afterwards, it's kind of the way it feels because he, did a great job. The team there is super professional, competent, very engaged. Same for the board of directors. And clearly the Academy is a place that Lynchburg's proud of and is investing in. So I couldn't be happier to be here.
And I know you know it very, very well because my understanding, and I want to talk a little bit about your background and stuff, and we'll get into this part a little bit later on, but you and Jeff got very, very close. My understanding is since COVID and had regular meetings and conversations and, shared ideas and all kinds of different things. So you're stepping into something pretty intimately.
Pretty well. The model of my previous job at Jefferson Center and this model are different in certain ways, but also similar in others. Of course, it's the performing arts. It's a performing arts center, multiple venues, fundraising, and that sort of thing. But yeah, Jeff and I started meeting every couple of weeks before the pandemic. In fact, I have to give him credit for alerting me to the fact that the pandemic was going to get real very quickly, which I didn't want to believe at first. But thanks to him, I started building contingency plans with my team, and that really paid off. I was like a lot of people, I just sort of couldn't believe it was going to get as bad as it was going to get, and as quickly as it did. So, but yes, I feel like I know the organization well, and frankly, the board of directors there did a great job in the interview process of helping me understand more about it. And in that process, as a leader, you want to assess: is this a place that I can do good work? Is this a place I can be successful? Is this a place where I can serve the community and serve the team? And I'm happy to say I answered yes to those things. And thus far, even though it's been a very short amount of time, I still believe those things are all true.
Let's talk a little bit about your background and, having spent 15 years at the Jefferson Center and, like you said, a lot of similarities to the Academy and I'm sure lots of things that you've learned and experienced that, that you'll bring to the Academy. But talk a little bit about your experience there
Sure.
at the Jefferson Center and really what that meant to you.
Sure. So, let me just go after the differences first.
Okay.
The difference is Jefferson Center is a former Jefferson High School. Okay. So 1923 to 1973, it was a high school in the city of Roanoke. And then in the late 80s, early 90s, alumni got together and decided they'd like to save the building and convert it mostly into commercial tenant spaces. So they took the classrooms and converted that into office space. And then they realized there's this auditorium in the middle of the high school, which would have been the original auditorium for the school, of course. And then they, transferred that into a new idea, which is Shackman Performance Hall, in around 2003, and then started doing performances there. So that hall is 900 seats. The Historic Theater at the Academy is 850 seats. Okay, we also have a black box theater there, about 110 people, and here with the music hall, it's the same size, right? What we didn't have at Jefferson Center, which is really cool here, is that middle space, which is the warehouse theater at the Academy, which can do 500 people. And of course, the team is finding really dynamic ways to use that space, and frankly, all of the spaces. The music hall is neat because it's you can do a lot of local talent. Anyway, those are sort of the differences and similarities. But the other difference is Jefferson Center's, the building itself is owned by the city of Roanoke, right? So it's a 40-year lease. In this case, of course, in Lynchburg, the Academy is fully owned by the 501c3. So it doesn't necessarily have that complexity of ownership and structure, which I think will make things slightly simpler for me here, frankly.
Talk about that for a little bit as much as you can, because obviously if the city owns it, the city needs to be involved with upkeep and different things like that. And, fortunately, and you'll learn this more as you're here, but the less you have to go in front of Lynchburg City Hall, the better off you're going to be.
Sure.
But that was an obstacle for you over there, right? I mean, having to, constantly try to get money for the upkeep of the building.
Yeah, it's the community there obviously is very invested in the Jefferson Center and believed in it and raised a ton of money to save it. And the city had invested in those stages as well. But structurally, I think the city, it's just at a point now where it's difficult for it to prioritize capital funding. And, for whatever reason, the lease that was signed, many, many years ago with the city of Roanoke and the foundation that operates the building, the lease stated very clearly that the foundation is 100% responsible for all capital repairs over the life of a 40-year lease. So, a lot of politics in that process, but those are good folks who are trying to figure out how to do the right thing for the city of Roanoke. There's great invested board members there too, so I think they'll figure it out over time. All leadership positions are naturally and organically political, and so my thought on that is, politics really isn't anything more than a willingness to be aware of what you're saying and the realization that what you're saying and how other people hear it are probably two different things, So being sort of, aware at all times that you need to be careful about what you say. You need to be careful when you're advocating because, you want to lay things out in a way that work for the community that you're in and compel people to believe in what you do and create a sense of momentum around what you're doing. I think that's clearly happened in Lynchburg with the Academy, no question about it. And there are a ton of invested people, stakeholders who care deeply about it. And that's whether they're, top level donors or folks that say, listen, I just love the programming and I come to 10 or 12 things a year, or, I buy tickets to 10 or 12 things a year, or, I'm a visual artist and I really care about the pottery studio because that gives me access to things I wouldn't otherwise have access to, or my kids in the theater camps in the summer. All that stuff is a pathway for people to get invested. And there are a lot of people who are deeply invested in it, clearly.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more in just a second about the opportunity for you coming from the Jefferson Center to the Academy, because obviously you saw it as a great opportunity to leave someplace that you'd been for 15 years. But talk about leaving the Jefferson Center, how hard that was for you. And my understanding is with 3 months notice that you totally invested in getting everybody over there totally prepared for you to leave and really just keep on going as if maybe nothing happened.
Yeah, well, that's there are two tracks to that question. I think the first one is how you manage a transition, and the other is, how did I know it was time? So I answer the second one first, which is, after 15 years, you start to reflect on what you're able to get done and maybe some of the things you weren't able to get done. And, you ask yourself as a leader, am I a person that can still do this in a way that's useful? Can I give this my best? And I think I had run it, frankly, the job had run its course. I had done what I could do there. I pushed the political envelope pretty far. I'd like to think it wasn't adversarial, but I did push it pretty far because it needed to be pushed. And so the timing was good, and I'm proud of what I did there. And then the second part is, transition. How do you manage a transition? A couple of factors in that. One is the board here at the Academy was incredibly kind to let me give, a long notice at the Jefferson Center, which allowed me to, create a sense of safety for that team and for that board and that community. And that could have been handled any, better than it was. Every time a leader announces a departure, it's going to create some level of panic, because it's a change. And change often is felt by people as loss. We're losing something that we understand and that we know. And so leadership is partly about managing change. In fact, it might be all of it, help people manage through change, help them feel safe in that situation. And, the other variable there is that I had a chief operations officer that was willing to take on the interim leadership role. So, that made things easier. And kind of similar at the Academy, Tabitha Abbott, who was the operations lead, stepped in and provided interim executive director management, until I arrived. So I have a great deal of gratitude both for how my transition was handled at the previous location and incredibly excited about how it was handled in my transition here. It's all been just about as perfect as it could be, frankly.
Cyrus, you talked a second ago about in making this decision, you were reflecting back on the things you had accomplished and the things that you might not have gotten to completion. Talk a little bit about some of the accomplishments you're most proud of over there, and maybe one or two things that didn't quite turn out the way you wanted.
Sure. I'm proud of the campaigns that we did at Jefferson Center. We were able to raise really important money at really important times, and whether that be for programmatic support so we could do more and better concerts, or whether it was for the capital side, meaning take care of the building. We did a good job of raising money. And I'm proud of the fact that, in my tenure there, we raised many multiples of my salary every year. We worked really hard on that. So the balance sheet was healthy. I'm proud of the fact that, programming continued, meaning the concert business, continued to develop and grow over time. And we were part of a story in Roanoke where live music sort of became part of the brand of that community. I'm proud of that. And I'm also proud of how we handled the pandemic. We figured out very quickly we needed to make decisions based on our value system. We needed to treat people with kindness, whether or not they agreed with our particular protocols. And I think we handled that. We handled that really well. If I could have solved everything, I think I would have added another $10 million to the balance sheet.
Is that all?
Yeah. And I probably, would have helped solve the structure of ownership of the building long-term of the city of Roanoke. And I'm not sure what that looks like in the future, but I do know that, that community cares very deeply about it. And so they are going to figure it out, no question.
Talk a little bit about, making the decision ultimately to come here and, the opportunity that you saw at the Academy, right? I mean, because, generally people will, if you're at a place, you're comfortable, things are going well, you're not really going to make a change just for the sake of making a change. What was the opportunity here that you really saw that made you jump at the chance to come and, take over for Jeff?
Sure. So the first part is something you've already mentioned, which I got to know the organization through Jeff and understood, how much he had gotten done there and how much potential there was. So my comfort level drastically increased through that process. And then secondly, coming to visit through the interview process. And I mean, it's clearly a beautiful place that's well-resourced with a diversity of spaces. So you can do lots of different things there. And, again, it felt like a place where my skill set, which is building alignment around strategy, building culture, fundraising for exciting ideas, right? Getting everybody talking about the same thing and creating forward momentum for a place. That's the stuff I feel like I do really, really well. So, it feels a little philosophical or cosmic, but really it was just an alignment of the things I think I can do well. And frankly, the things I think I really like doing most with the needs of the organization at that time. But in terms of a moment that sealed the deal, there were probably a couple. One was the last part of my interview with the board, where it was clear to me how dedicated this community is to it, because that makes the job more meaningful. And then secondly is when I walked into the hall during that interview process. I had been there before, but of course walked in and remembered again how beautiful it is and how well appointed it is and how much this community has invested in it and how deeply it cares about it. So, it's sort of a no-brainer, frankly.
Is there more, I may be putting this wrong, but is there more opportunity here? My understanding is the budget for the Academy versus the Jefferson Center may be close to double. And you look at what's going on in Roanoke and, there's the Berglund Center. There are different, there's more maybe competition. And, here in Lynchburg, it's kind of, I don't want to say the Academy is the only game in town, but when it comes to a lot of the stuff that it offers, it really is.
It's an important macro level reality and opportunity here, which is, you described it beautifully, which is, there isn't a ton of redundancy. This is going to be, again, feel a little academic, but the truth is the nonprofit sector exists in the free market too, right? And so at some point, communities have to come to grips with the fact that they may have built more cultural organizations than a community can support, either through earned revenue, i.e. ticket buying, or other earned sources, and contributed revenue. That happens. I don't think, Roanoke has gotten to that point, but I'm sure that Lynchburg hasn't, right? The Academy can do so many different things. It does those things well. And so the resources are being, focused in that area, which makes a lot of sense to me. And I don't think, it's hard for me to think of anything that the Academy can't do. It's great gallery space. The educational programs are diverse, doing a lot of different things, everything from theater to visual art, as I've mentioned, and the programming is great. So I do think that there is a intelligent design. And if this community continues to think about Lynchburg this way, right, don't build things for which there aren't capacity, then I think the pathway is easier for everyone.
You talked about, the different educational programs and things that are offered through the community. And, I think it's called the access points or something along those lines. And I know that was something that was, important to Jeff. And one of the things he focused on was community outreach and getting involved in the bus that goes out into the community. Is that greater here than what you had in Roanoke?
Well,
or different?
It's different, but here's something interesting. That, again, not to bore people with IRS tax code or anything, but but the nonprofit arts sector exists under the educational part of the IRS tax code. The 501c3 part is education, right? So at the core of our mission is education. So you might say we exist to engage audiences and then educate them over time with the idea, whether it's an education program, i.e. a kid is coming to do a week-long camp, or someone's coming to see Wynton Marsalis and Jazz at Lincoln Center, all of the things are educational at heart, which is an opportunity to experience something that they wouldn't otherwise be able to experience, with the idea that it can be life-enhancing and inspiring and help them think of the world in a different way. I mean, that's the work. So every arts organization is inherently educational, both in terms of tax code and probably what it's doing, for a community.
I guess I was driving more, at the camps and the educational things, and wondering if that was something that was different and maybe appealing about coming here to be able to kind of expand the outreach in a different way.
Rich, you asked the question in a beautiful way. I just answered it in an overly academic way. So let's go back to the way you asked it, which I appreciate. So, Jefferson Center's programming in terms of education was really around music. There's a music studio there called the Music Lab. Very, very cool. kids come in, learn to write music, record music, play music, all kinds of stuff, produce. And then we'd have summer camps, Jazz Institute, there's a pop music camp, and, so it was really music focused. And part of the reason, as we were discussing, is there's lots of other organizations, Mill Mountain Theater or others doing theater camps, right? Or, other types of programming. The Tallman's doing summer camps for arts, right? So a lot of that stuff is situated in and around the academy here in Lynchburg, which I think is very important, again, because there's an economy of scale there. Imagine that you're trying to do everything the academy did, but you've got 4 or 5 different organizations with 4 or 5 different facilities. That just isn't an intelligent design for the nonprofit art sector.
So having all this now kind of under your umbrella rather than different organizations doing different aspects of it.
Yes.
What does that do for you?
I think it's great. Now, if I had gotten there and, if I didn't have confidence in the team's ability to implement those things and do them well, then I'd be concerned at this juncture, but that's just not the case. It's a great team, highly invested. The first week I'm there, they're doing a camp for kids, a theater camp for kids during Lynchburg City's spring break. Really, really great. Into the woods, these people are really super dedicated to the kids in these experiences and understand it's an important part of the brand and it's an important part of what it does. Yeah, I feel good about it. Really, really good.
You were mentioning the music lab and the different things over at the Jefferson Center, and I think I saw a little bit of a twinkle in your eye. Music's where your heart is. You're a musician, a jazz musician. You play, you record music. Talk about that part of your background and how it impacts you and your role, not only at the Jefferson Center, but now at the Academy.
Sure. It would probably be easy to assume that since that's been my background, that would be the bulk of my focus, but this will come across as hopefully somewhat funny to folks, but, I don't necessarily love the music business. It's not my favorite thing in the world. Talking to agents on the phone and doing that sort of stuff is not great, frankly. And projecting what a music show might do, a concert might do, is the hardest thing for an arts organization to do. It's kind of like we're all.
What do you mean?
It's just really hard to understand what a show might sell or what it might not sell. So the music process for me has built my sense of how important art is and what it can do to a person's life. And it's been a pathway for me to, graduate high school and turn 18 in the Navy because I joined the Navy band because I knew I wanted to be around music and I wanted to play music. And then, even in undergrad, I'm playing a lot, and then a master's degree in music. But it's really just always been a pathway to the other things. And the other things right now are using that belief I have and the way that the arts can inspire people to lead and manage arts organizations so we can do that thousands and thousands of times, 100,000 times in a year, that many different experiences. And so, I don't know yet whether the Academy needs or wants different music programming. My guess is probably not, it's at a good point. What it is booking seems to be working. What I might be interested in is a conversation about whether the organization's taking risk when it should or could, For example, here's an example.
Give me an example.
Yeah.
Yep.
So here's a show which we think will be deeply meaningful, whether it be music or a theater or whatever it might be. And we think it's going to be really meaningful. It's $50,000, but we have absolutely no idea whether we can generate that kind of return in ticket sales. Does the organization have the risk tolerance to go ahead and book it? And does it have the underwriting support to support it in cases where it is so artistically important for a community that it's worth doing, even if it's never going to generate the earned revenue to cover the cost of the artist fee?
So there's a balance there.
That is the work. And honestly, the Academy has done a great job because they set up a fund called the Merriman Fund, which is specifically focused on that sort of programmatic strength over time, where they can dial into that fund, pull back and support an event or a show that, again, they need to have some sort of risk tolerance for.
What's an example of a program, whether it be a concert or a play or, whatever the case might be, of something that you're bringing in that, may not generate enough money to cover the expense of it, but you're bringing it anyway because of the importance of what it offers culturally?
I'll give you an example from the arts sector.
Okay.
Opera would be the best example of that,
Okay.
right? So, opera companies work I was going to say struggle, which is not the right word, really. They work very hard to figure out the right balance of underwriting, the amount of support they get with the ability to sell tickets, right? And opera, has decreasing sales over time as people have less relationship to it. And so they figure out ways to dynamically program their opera and try to generate the support they need through earned revenue and contributed revenue. So that's kind of the example we all use. Opera's worth doing, of course. It's maybe the best representation of Western European cultures: theater, costume design, music, orchestra, everything happening all on the stage at the same time. And that's an exciting thing. And if you experience it, it's amazing. It's just a very difficult thing to pencil out over time.
So how do you juggle that balance, right? Of, this is important for us to do. It's an important part of, art and culture and all that. But we know it doesn't have the appeal to bring in the type of crowd that we need. And then along those lines, is that crowd that appeals to getting older and, do you see it disappearing at some point?
So you've asked three really good questions, and I'm thinking I might do a good job of remembering them all. But if I don't,
try and remember
we'll
too.
go back. But lastly, you mentioned sort of the aging out reality.
Right.
That's been true for years and years and years, right? Like people are concerned about that. My answer to that is, you have to practice acceptance about it if that's happening. You get to figure out how to dynamically program for younger audiences. But my next answer to that would be, you got to be clear on whether or not you're at the right scale. If you're an opera company and you have a 2,000 seat theater, but you're only selling 600 tickets, it's really difficult to downsize, right? You don't go to the 2,000 seat theater and make it 600 seats smaller, right? So the infrastructure in the art sector happens to be less flexible. So, that's a trick. But, your main point is, how do you find that balance over time? And it's having conversations just like this. The conversation we're having about what matters, what's meaningful, what's artistic, and how to make that sustainable over time is the conversation I'll be having with the community, the board, and the team, and fundraiser, and donors in the fundraising process. You just keep asking the question. You say, hey, I think this matters. You all think this matters. Can we figure out a way to do this over time? And this isn't a near-term question, and there isn't a near-term solution. We're talking about 3 to 5 to 7 to 8 to 10 years to develop audiences for certain ideas, right? I mean, again, I have a master's degree in jazz guitar. It doesn't mean I think we should book jazz 15 times a year here and think that it's going to pencil out. Maybe we put some jazz, again, just as an example.
Right.
I'm not saying we'll do this, but put some jazz in the music hall, 100 seats, see if it breaks even in the first year. And then maybe the second year it starts to generate a little excess profit. Or maybe it doesn't, and we find someone who's so invested in the experience there that they say, I'm gonna write a check every year for $25,000 so you guys can keep doing this. You find those invested parties. And practice again, just be realistic with yourself about what works and what doesn't work. There is no benefit to sitting in a room and complaining that it didn't work, right? Like if you go to market with a product and you find that it didn't sell what you thought it would sell, or your projection wasn't right, or it's going to take a longer time frame for a return on that investment, then you have to be honest about that, and you got to find solutions for it over time.
You mentioned developing an audience for it, and I'm going to go back to opera. You talked about, it could be a 5 or 10 year period down the road. How do you develop? How do you develop an audience for something that feels like it's kind of passing us by.
So the classic ways they've been doing it in the opera world are the following. They're doing opera in small spaces or in warehouses or in bars, right? So, hey, we're at 5:00 today. We're going to do La Boheme at whatever bar that only seats 140. The capacity of the place is 140 people. But we're going to actually have the singers and actors there, the performers, do the first act of La Boheme. Cool. And then all of a sudden there's 140 people in there having a neat, dynamic, hopefully inspirational experience who then think, okay, that's something I'd like to do again. That's like something I'd like to experience. And then if you're doing a good job of communicating with those folks and building them into your marketing plan, you're then providing them opportunities to come and experience full opera on stage with all of the costumes and, all of the set design and all the things that make it amazing, So
you're hoping to kind of whet people's appetites with it in a smaller, shorter period of time and have them want to experience it in all its glory, so to speak.
Yeah. And again, I feel like I'm brainstorming with you about this in a way, because I don't think anybody has it figured out necessarily. The Metropolitan Opera doesn't have it figured out. Local opera companies don't have it figured out. We're all trying to figure it out over time. What I will say in a black and white way, there's no gray area in this. If what you do isn't of quality, if it's, mediocre, go ahead. You just go ahead and stop trying.
Right.
If you're going to do it, it has to be exceptional. The experience has to be really, really, really good. Example of that is we're going to, this again, sort of bad examples here, but if you're going to see if jazz works in a community or blue, can we do blues here? Don't, hire the best blues band you can get in the world for the amount of money you have. So people are leaving going, I'm not 100% sure what I just experienced, but I want to do that again.
Yeah, gotcha.
So quality is just key. It needs to sound great in the room. Your patron experience needs to be exceptional, which usually means they can get a drink when they want one, that they can get to the bathrooms when they want to, that the parking was reasonable. They didn't have to walk, 35 minutes to get to your venue after parking or whatever the challenges might be. And they feel good in the room. I mean, a person can decide to come back or not based on whether the temperature felt good in a room. I mean, it's all of that stuff. You think about all of the detail from a team, like at the Academy, to making the experience great for everyone. It's whether or not the box office knew that when you were calling that, you were a major donor and they remembered to thank you. It's the experience you had when you're parking your car. It's the experience you have waking your way in, whether the bar was set and ready and you had a professional experience there. It's all of it until you're sitting in your seat and Buddy Guy or whoever it is comes out and plays and blows your mind. It has to all be right and it has to all be good.
Cyrus, talk a little bit about the demographic, right? There's, I'm sure, still a perception, that the Academy is about, old Boonesboro money, right? The '03, that whole thing. But then you touched on the music hall and the local bands and the college kids that get an opportunity to play there. And, the Academy is a lot more than just the historic theater, even though that's kind of front and center. But it's important to bring different people in from different parts of society, from different parts of the area, right? Talk about how all that works and what you do to try and facilitate that.
Sure. It's a great question, Rich. And this is a scenario where I'm going to admit that I don't have the answer also again,
Did you experience that? Like, I don't know much about Roanoke, but is there that same perception perhaps there about it being, that type of? Well,
there's again, sort of a macro and a micro answer here. On a macro level, the arts, particularly high art, has always been considered, opportunity elitist, for the wealthy, right? Elitist. Yeah. Thank you for the word. On a micro level, the question is how you're trying to solve that problem and whether or not the venue has a reputation for that being the case. I can tell you here are the mistakes that I've made. One is presenting something like jazz or blues, and assuming African Americans will come to it because it's music from their culture.
Like historically,
Yeah.
sure, yeah.
That's a mistake. What the right thing to do is go to that community and ask the following question. What could we be programming for you that would be meaningful for you? Have a conversation about it. More than a survey, it's a conversation. And start a dialogue with your community. Michelin Hall at the Academy does a great job of that. She's out in the community learning from people, what they want to hear and what is meaningful to them. That's important. And I also will say, diversity as a concept has become super polarized politically, but all it means is we exist as a nonprofit to serve anyone who can benefit by what we're doing. Mm-hmm. And so if you do you look at your ticket data and you look at the demographics of the people attending and you realize it's super one-sided, then you have got an important question to ask yourself. And again, I don't think anybody has a immediate solution to that problem other than continue to dialogue about it and prioritize it. Another version of this is, as you mentioned earlier, oh gosh, it's only, older parts of our population who have a relationship to opera. Well, if you believe in opera, you believe that it can serve 20 and 30-year-olds too, and their lives can be changed by a great operatic experience. So how are we engaging them and getting them in the door with a different kind of diversity? I want to say too, we've talked a lot here about opera as an example. Mm-hmm. I don't want anybody to get the impression that, I think the solution is, 100 opera events a year, right. Or 100 jazz shows a year or more blues. I don't necessarily think that's the case. What I can promise, this community is going to have that conversation about what it wants, what it needs, how we can benefit from the conversation and, what's being programmed there.
You kind of nodded a little bit when I said the perception of, it being kind of for old, Boonesboro money type of thing. Is that perception accurate as far as
I don't know.
Okay.
I was nodding because that, again, is a common belief in the arts. And,
right. I was just wondering if you had heard that, through all your different conversations with Jeff or other people, that perception still exists in Lynchburg.
No, I haven't, actually, luckily. I mean, again, I'm relatively new, right. So maybe that, maybe I'll hear that in my conversations with the community. I wouldn't be afraid of that. Mm-hmm. It often takes, parts of your community that have the capacity to support, to create venues like that and support them and underwrite them to ensure that there are opportunities for every parts of the community. The arts, again, not to be, overly academic, but the arts have always been supported, all right? Like even in Florence, Italy in the 1700s by the folks who had money.
Right. And I was going to ask that kind of as a follow-up question, if those are the people who have the money and they're the ones who are underwriting and supporting it, it's hard to get away from that perception because you have to some degree, cater to those folks.
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting conversation. I don't think that's a bad thing. Mm-hmm. The job of a leader is to say, in the arts, or frankly in the nonprofit sector, is to say, this is a version of a stakeholder that has a voice and has treasury to support this mission. And this is a version of a stakeholder that may not have the same level of treasury sometimes, but has a voice and deserves to be heard. And you have that conversation. That is the subtle work of being a leader and a manager in the arts. And you have to keep your ears open and your heart open to that conversation and be willing to hear that you're not getting it right. That happens a lot.
The amphitheater is getting ready to open.
Yeah.
Coming from Roanoke, there are lots of other avenues, venues for folks to enjoy music and the arts. We talked earlier about the Academy sort of being the main game in town. With the amphitheater opening, what challenges or opportunities does that present for you?
Let me answer that by saying in Roanoke, when I started 15 years ago, there was no Center for the Arts at Virginia Tech. There was no Harvester in Rocky Mount. There was no the exchange, a brand new venue. There were the amphitheater, and one amphitheater wasn't open. And I will admit to being anxious and concerned about every one of them when they came online. But there has been exactly zero impact on the ability for Jefferson Center to engage the ticket buy community over time, and the programming dollars have only increased. So I want to admit that it's hard for me to believe this, and frankly, also hard for me to believe I'm saying it out loud. But in the case of live music, I think that it is a case where high tides do raise all ships. It really does. If you go to the amphitheater, have an exceptional experience here, and you make live music part of your life, you may be looking for other experiences. And obviously the Academy's offering lots of them, Also, I think one of the first shows there's Dwight Yoakam, which is one of the best shows I've ever seen in my life.
Right?
Yeah, it's really good. He does something like 28 songs in about 65 minutes, and they're back to back. Great band from Nashville. Just a really, really good show. So, I think when you go and you see something like that, whether it be in a big venue or a small venue, and you go, man, I loved every part of that. Our spirit probably yearns for more of those kind of experiences. And so,
the reality is you're probably talking about very different types of performances, right? At an indoor venue like the Academy that seats under 1,000, and an outdoor kind of amphitheater type stadium. Although ironically enough, I've heard Everclear will be there and was at the Academy at one point. And
I was going to answer. I think there are acts that probably could be in both. I should know this, but do you know right offhand what the capacity of the amphitheater is?
I don't know, no.
I don't know either. I somehow remember maybe 2,500 or 3,000 or something. But anyway, Dwight Yoakam at the Academy or Dwight Yoakam at the amphitheater becomes a function of what the market can bear and really ticket pricing. At the Academy, you might need to charge $95 a ticket. For the amphitheater, maybe they can charge $40 and still make sense of the show.
And it would seem like it'd be two very different performances.
And experiences for everyone, And, I'm personally not actually a big venue guy, Once you get above 1,000 seats, I think, for me, it's about sound quality. It's about, the experience being in the room. I like small clubs and the experiences I've had there. So, for me, I'm going to always choose the theater. I'm going to choose a 400-seat venue probably over the others. But, to answer your primary question, I think it's great for Lynchburg. And, it'll be great to see what happens there. And it's great for downtown Lynchburg. I mean, really think about it. Maybe Dwight Yoakam fans don't spend a lot of time in downtown Lynchburg, but all of a sudden now they're going to. And they're going to normalize coming downtown. They're going to be in the restaurants and bars. And it just makes for a better microcosm, and just makes for a better downtown.
What's your impression of downtown Lynchburg?
I'm living on, I don't know if you say this in a podcast, but I can just say it this way. I'm living downtown, and it's delightful. I lived in Harlem for 3 years, in Brooklyn for a year, and I love being able to walk everywhere. I love being, 3 or 4 blocks from where I work. I found it delightful in every way. The Riverwalk, the restaurants, the farmers market. Clearly unbelievable. That place is unbelievable on a Saturday morning. This is so great, Of course, we all get used to driving, but I usually, park my car and I don't move it. I'm really happy about that. It's pretty great.
One of the things I've heard about you, and well, no, it's a good thing. I told you before I was digging for dirt. I didn't find much.
Right.
But I've heard that when it comes to national tours and booking, that might be an area where you might be able to enhance because that was never Jeff's, from my conversation with him, that was never his kind of niche, right? I mean, and he even talked about the fact that, he's excited to see, at some point, because I know you've talked about, I want to come in, I want to learn what it's all about. I'm not coming in to make any changes or anything like that right off the bat. But eventually, you'll put some different stamps on things. And one of the things, like I said, I heard was national tours and booking is kind of a sweet spot for you.
Yeah, but as I admitted earlier, I also don't love that part of the business, interestingly enough, because I think I am naturally a pretty aggressive negotiator, which I think will benefit Lynchburg probably. I understand how to look at deal structure. I know how to ensure that we're not paying more for an artist than we should pay. And I know how to take a risk on shows when it makes sense to do that. Whether that skill set results in bigger, better, and more dynamic shows, I'm not sure yet. Again, it'll be dependent on what the community can bear and what the market tells us about what it wants and what it's interested in buying tickets for. I mean, that is a business I know and understand. I think the team at the Academy does a good job of looking at those opportunities and going after them. But as you said, I'm just in the stage of asking questions. I think the right musical experience, frankly, any performing arts experience at the right moment with the right group of people is the most important stuff in the world, So I'll clearly be looking at more opportunities for folks to have experiences of that type. I've been thinking lately, like, we don't ask people who they voted for, right? When you buy a ticket, the only thing you have to do is say, this is an experience I'd like to have. And it's an analog experience. I want to sit in a room with 500 or 600 other people, and I want to experience what's happening on stage, hopefully with my cell phone off, And that's a beautiful thing. And I think it can be the most unifying thing that a community does anymore. You can say, I love Derek Trucks and Susan Tedeschi, and I'm going to come to this event because I want to experience what they do, and I want to be in a room with other people who love what they do and have this shared experience. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And frankly, that's what inspires me to continue to stay engaged in the difficult business part of it.
You talked about the risk part of it before, and I meant to ask you this. But can you give an example of, a booking that you brought in that you thought would be fantastic, and maybe it didn't work out as well as you had hoped? And then the other way around, one that you thought, hey, we're going to do this, we're going to roll the dice, and it was a huge hit.
Gosh, it might be difficult for me to recollect those specifically. I can give you examples of, you might have been asking the question in terms of the financials, like a show we thought would pencil out perfectly and really didn't at all. And we've had a lot of those. I've had a lot of those. And then others where we thought, man, if this sells 100 tickets and then people, go crazy. Well, I mean, one of them would be, sorry. It's been a lot of shows over 15 years. I can
imagine. I was just wondering if any came
Yeah, one would be, and I'm blanking on her name, which is embarrassing, but a jazz bass player that won the New Artist Grammy. This would have been 12 years ago. We had already booked her for the season. She won the New Artist Grammy, beating out somebody famous.
I would love to jump in and help you.
Sorry. I shouldn't have brought this up as an example if I could remember the name. But I mean, I think she beat out Justin Bieber, for the New Artist Grammy. And we had already booked her, and I think we were, like $6,000 for her, right? And now she's the most famous person in the world because, Justin Bieber, she beat Justin Bieber, right? And it sold out overnight, and it was artistically just unbelievable, and also sold very, very well. I would say, as I said, I'm sort of a small music guy, so seeing Emmylou Harris and Buddy Miller there, every time I see Wynton Marsalis in a small venue, I love it. I don't know, over time, if I look at it as a career, there's definitely been more wins than there have been losses. And not to, again, bore anybody, but you think of what you do in a fiscal year increment, right? And you say, here are the 35 things we're going to book. And that gives you the the ability to lose on some and make on others, and be honest with yourself about where you were right or wrong on your projections,
You had mentioned that the strategic plan went through 2025, and they're going to need a new one.
Yep.
And I'm willing to bet that you're not going to jump in on that right away because you want to kind of learn the landscape of everything that's going on. But I would imagine that's pretty exciting to be able to, come in and, once you kind of get a good read on everything, to work with your team and develop a new strategic plan moving forward.
It's the best part of the work because, strategy planning isn't anything other than creating an environment within which people can dialogue honestly about where we are and where we'd like to go, and spend a lot of time on the past. You say, okay, this is what I think is happening. You do classic SWOT analysis, right? And you say, okay, here's where we are. And let's sit around in a room and dream together about what it might look like in the future. And people, of course, make the mistake. Smart people don't, but a lot of people do make the mistake of thinking that strategic planning is something that's sort of reserved for the nonprofit sector, where we sit around and sing kumbaya, and
That's not how it goes.
No trust falls. But the greatest corporations, as Jim Collins says, in the world, have a plan. And they have a vision and they have a mission that clarify what it is they want to do for the world. It's the same thing, just in a smaller version with a more, a footprint of impact that might be smaller. It's the same work. You're creating dialogue, you're creating a vision of the future that says this is why Lynchburg and the surrounding community is going to be stronger and, more informed and more inspired because of the work that we do. And then you figure out where there's alignment on how to get there and where there's not. It's a beautiful process. And, so for the first couple of months, I'm really just building trust by, reminding people that my primary motive is to be kind. My second motive is to listen. And my third is to be useful and be in service of what we can do to make this community great. And, I'm not going to get it all right, but I think if I practice those things and do so with an open heart, then the next stage is we all get better together. That's a really, really cool thing. I mean, I have a great deal of gratitude about the opportunity to do that with people. It's the best way to get to know people. You learn a lot about your community and a lot about your team when you do that.
So I was talking about the strategic plan that you're going to have an opportunity to really spearhead coming up in the next months or years. Every time anyone takes a new opportunity, there are always ideas that flash through their head. Maybe this, maybe that. And again, maybe not, right? I mean, but share a couple with us of, hey, maybe this would work, or maybe this would be cool, for ideas that you might have that may or may not pan out moving forward.
So I'm going to answer the question in a relatively boring way, just initially.
That's not fun.
Yeah, sorry. The first one would be financial, right? Looking at the balance sheet and saying, this works matters and this building matters, right? So is there a way to make the programming and the facility bulletproof? Right? Imagine another pandemic, but the organization's fine. Or imagine year 5, there's a concerted effort, which has already started at the academy, luckily, to have the resources, ready and available to take care of catastrophic capital issues, or because you want, to book something that you're really, really excited about, but afraid it may not pencil out. That's what I imagine. That's what excites me. Again, finding a line,
like a rainy day fund type.
But an endowment, again, sort of that dream. What does an $8 or $10 million endowment do for an organization like that? I get excited about the idea that we could be the model in the country for stabilizing a venue where people are flying in here from Portland, Oregon, or even Chicago, and saying, "How did you guys do this? How did you create a place that can take artistic risk, is an extremely responsible steward of its infrastructure, and has fine-tuned its programming in such a way that it reaches people of every age group, every ethnicity, every type of diversity. That's what excites me. I don't know what it is yet, but I think this is a place where we could do it for sure.
The music hall, I mean, you touched on that earlier, but kind of a small venue, almost the antithesis of what the historic theater is, right? I mean, but the opportunity to cultivate and grow local talent. And I mean, when you talk about the mission of, reaching out and being diverse and reaching into all different parts of the community, I mean, that's something that I'm sure a lot of people don't associate with the Academy because they're thinking of the historic theater. But I mean, that's such a big part of it.
It is. And it's an incubator, really, right? So national touring, as we were talking about earlier, is a very complicated business. And this isn't a great time if you're an act that makes $2,500 a night. You're trying, the number of venues you can perform in across the country have gotten, smaller, particularly due to the pandemic. Some are recovering, some aren't, right? So, but the perfect world is we've got a local artist that has 3 or 4 sold out shows in the music hall. And then we book them in the Warehouse Theater, and they sell 300 seats, 400 seats, 500 seats. And the next thing you know, they're touring across America and internationally, and they come and get to sell out the main hall. I mean, that's kind of a perfect incubator. And hopefully for them, they outlive the market. Next thing you know, they have to be in 5,000 seat venues, or maybe they do the amphitheater after that. Do an outdoor show. But you're right. I think the music hall can be a great incubator, both for local talent, but also for that pathway to the bigger venues.
One of the things you did in Roanoke at the Jefferson Center was the subscription series. They don't do that here.
No.
Is that an opportunity potentially?
Potentially. And I don't know yet whether it works. Here's what a subscription does for you. You say, I'm selling these 8 shows. And then, 4 of those shows are tentpole type shows, Emmylou Harris and Dwight Yoakam and, Wynton Marsalis or whatever those might be. I keep hitting the microphone. Sorry about that. You're finding those opportunities and 4 shows everybody's excited about. And then you put something in there that maybe no one's heard about, but is going to blow their minds, But as you sell that whole series, you are mitigating risk because people are saying yes to 2 tickets to everything. And in an 850 seat hall, if you can sell 200 of those, you've not only cash flowed your season in the early part of it when you need to be paying artist fees, you've also, again, mitigated risk on the total of everything. And you've gotten 200 people to a show that might have only sold 100. Plus the additional seats you
right, and you're opening them up to something new and different that they might not normally have gone to, and potentially expanding their horizons.
Yeah, that's a benefit to a subscription series. The downside is that those seats are often taken by those 200 people, the best seats in the house. So you go on sale for a show, and you don't get people aren't as excited because they can't be in the front row for something they've always wanted to see. And then there's, selling subscriptions itself is actually a super complicated process because you're usually holding the 2 seats those folks had the year before, and you're giving them the chance to renew those seats. It's a lot more complicated than saying shows on sale and letting people call the box office or go online and buy tickets wherever they can get them, And I don't know yet whether it would be an opportunity here. My guess is if we did implement it, it would be a exciting change. And then 10 years later, they decided, people would decide maybe that isn't the way to go and go back to the other. It's just sort of the natural ebb and flow of the art sector and the performing arts sector,
And you talked about before building that endowment, the rainy day fund, whatever, we want to call it. But you kind of went through that a little bit in Roanoke with the Jefferson Center needing renovations and different things along those lines. And obviously the Academy just opened up a handful of years ago, but already kind of planning ahead to make sure that, that type of deterioration or whatever to the building itself doesn't happen is an important part of what you're doing too, right?
Yeah. And, at Jefferson Center, we had done the same thing. There's an endowment, and then there was a programming endowment, and these dollars exist to make sense of the facility over time. And varied invested donors started those. It's the same thing here. The one committee meeting I've been to since I've been on board was a facilities committee meeting full of invested board members and other community members, engineers, electricians, folks that want to see the place succeed. And it was a very, very inspiring thing to see those folks there making really good decisions about how to expend what resources exist on the priorities. That's best case scenario.
Cyrus, talk a little bit about your leadership abilities. I've already built an amazing culture at the Jefferson Center. What are some of the kind of keystones for that moving forward? You've already talked about having a great team in place. The transition's been amazing, but now, continuing on that culture that Jeff built, or, building on it. Talk about that.
Some of this might, again, sort of be the, the philosophy of leadership. But, in my case, it's driven by, empathy and kindness and a sincere interest in seeing people do well and resourcing them and being available to them. And, and then also caring, sort of the key word everybody uses is self-care, but also sort of taking care of myself so I can come to the work in a way that, where I can be present and helpful and help people have the difficult conversations when those difficult conversations need to be had. 100% of the work is culture, really, is building a place where people want to come to work. They feel good about the way the conversations are happening. We're celebrating successes and being honest with ourselves about when we may not have been as successful as we were hoping we could be. That's sort of my leadership approach, a sincere interest in, seeing people do well. And I'll also add, just on a managerial level, also knowing when, it doesn't seem as if we're going to improve in a certain, category of our work, and knowing what to do and how to be decisive in those moments too. That's part of it. If the work matters, which it does, it deserves to be done really, really well and professionally. And we need to figure out how to do that every day.
Are the dad jokes coming with you?
Yes. That's funny that someone said that.
I heard about that.
Yeah, I've got too many of those.
Do you have a favorite?
Oh, gosh. I can't. I don't know. I came up with a joke that's kind of a dad joke, but it's a musician joke. So not everyone will get it, which is why are musicians uncomfortable with AI? And the answer is because it doesn't provide a meal. I told you, it's a musician dad joke. But, it's like the first thing you have to do.
You want to explain that for the
Yeah,
non-musicians?
sure. The first thing, in every gig I've ever booked, evidently, and whenever you book an act at your venue, the first question is, is a meal provided? You know what I mean? As if musicians can't feed themselves, like there aren't convenience stores or fast food on the way in. But yeah, so I have to develop my own series of dad jokes for this locality and this market to make sure they work. But
you're excited about being here, though.
I am. Yeah, I'm super excited. It's fun. I sit down at the computer, or go to the office. I'm like, man, this is cool. It's a lot right now. A lot coming at me, a lot to understand, a lot of opportunity. But man, back to your leadership question, I think enthusiasm is really, really important too. You owe it to people to come in upbeat and optimistic about the future. And I haven't seen a single thing here that gives me the impression that enthusiasm and optimism isn't warranted and will be paid back many, many times by other people's energy.
You've only been here a short period of time. Is there anything that's caught you off guard or surprised you, either positively or negatively so far?
I've been pleasantly surprised how engaged the board is. They really understand the business and they care deeply about it. And they already care deeply about me, and making sure that I can be successful here. So that's been nice. You know, I've also been thinking lately too that, again, you don't necessarily have to fully understand something to care about it. And so maybe I'm a little surprised how quickly I've care about it as deeply as I do. But I've decided to put the bulk of my personal velocity and focus on the academy, and I'm happy for that because I think it will pay off for everyone if I do it right.
This may be a loaded question, but is there one thing that you're most excited about coming up?
Oh, on the schedule?
Or anything?
Well, I mean, I've got a board meeting Thursday. They're doing
That's exciting.
Yeah, exactly. And it actually is because it's like you get to, it's sort of like your opportunity to be on stage and get to know people. And I know again, we said strategy planning a lot, but we have some upcoming strategic planning sessions set. And
what about on the schedule?
So again, like I said, I kind of like the small venue stuff. So there's some singer-songwriter stuff that I look forward to seeing in the music hall, and some groups that I can't mention yet that have already been booked for the fall that I'm super excited about. Sorry, those news releases haven't gone out yet, but I like anything that's soulful. I can just say it that way. Regardless of genre, if it comes with a great deal of soul, I'm interested in seeing it.
What percentage of shows do you typically see in person?
Historically, probably 75%.
Do you?
Yeah. I'm not sure if I'll make that number here, but that I like to be in the room. I like to know what it sounds like. If you're not experiencing it like a patron would experience it, it's hard to speak to it. So I'll make many of them.
Well, and I would assume also making sure that the patron experience is a good one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and saying, hey, listen, this is how it sounded where I was sitting. Whether that be exceptional or not great or somewhere in the middle, but being able to speak to that's really important.
Is there one show that you would like and think is realistic to bring to Lynchburg? Well, you think would blow people away? Well,
they already had a smaller version of Derek Trucks and Susan Tedeschi, but I think bringing the full band would be amazing. At this juncture, that might be challenging because they're playing 2,500, 3,500 seat venues, and their scale is, they're paying, rightfully so. I think it's the best touring band in America, frankly. So that would be neat. I mean, I always love Emmylou Harris. Anytime I see her, I think that'd be cool. Maybe for the small venue, a great singer-songwriter, a very famous music songwriter out of Nashville named Daryl Scott. I think it'd be cool to see him in one of the smaller venues when he's on tour. So those are just some ideas, but again, I don't know enough to know whether those things work, but I think that'd be very cool.
Cyrus, I appreciate you stopping by. It's been a pleasure getting to know you. Congratulations on the gig, and I know you're excited and everybody's excited to have you. Thank you.
I'm very excited to be here, and thank you for the time.